Today, we are celebrating the NNI on the 20th anniversary of the signing of the 21st Century Nanotechnology Research and Development Act. This bill codified the nation's commitment to nanotechnology and also provided a roadmap. It was a roadmap for the thoughtful and collaborative development of emerging technologies in the United States. So we appreciate Congress's steady commitment to the NNI, and no one has been more instrumental than Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon. He was the author of the legislation, and in the decades since its passing has been a constant champion for nanotechnology. So please join me in welcoming Senator Ron Wyden.
Very inflationary introduction. So it's wonderful to be with all of you, and in particular, Dr. Brough, Dr. Probakar, I guess we're going to hear from this afternoon, and Dr. Lane especially. And one of the first rules in the United States Senate is that friends should not filibuster friends. So I'm going to be brief. And what I want to do is take you a little bit down memory lane to talk about how the 21st Century Nanotechnology Research and Development Act came to be, how it has spawned some extraordinary scientific innovations, and where we go from here. And lots of people deserve credit on this whole effort. And I'm just going to spend a couple minutes talking about how the law came to be. Around the turn of the century, back when I was a Senate newbie, I had the theory that I ought to try to do everything I could to get my state into new fields and new industries. At the time, there was really only one United States senator who knew how to use a computer. I kid you not. Pat Leahy of Vermont. Do we have any Vermonters here? And I said, look, I really want to get into this. And I was on the Commerce Committee, which had jurisdiction over science, issues. Some of you might recall that. And because there basically wasn't anybody else in it, I got a chance to write 3 important bills that were really the foundation of where we wanted to go in the internet. I wrote the Internet Tax Non-Discrimination Bill, which ensured that you wouldn't get discriminated against online when you did business and you bought kinds of things relative to offline. I wrote the Digital Signatures Law, which now means you can just click through all those real estate documents that used to be torture. And I also wrote Section 230, which has come to be known as the 26 words that created the internet. And around that time, I heard some of the people that I was hanging out with using this new word called nanotechnology. Nobody really knew what in the world it meant, but I finally said to somebody, hey, would it be fair to just say this thing is the science of small stuff? And everybody said, yeah, works for us. And so as we got into it, we began to see the prospect of innovations, detecting airborne toxins, reducing pollution from cars, healthcare. And we all came to see, look, this has got exceptional potential. And my home state's printing industry gave us a special kind of on-ramp into the whole debate about technology. So we had something else that we did in Oregon that we thought was pretty cool. We started something called the Business Summit. And so I showed up in 2002 and I told everybody, here's the vision for nanotechnology. Nanotechnology is the science, soon to be the business, of increasing the capacity of our technology while reducing its size to the molecular level. 1 or 2 regions in the United States could possibly be leaders. How about Oregon? So Over the course of the year, I drafted this legislation as chair of the Subcommittee on Science and Technology. And in doing so, I haven't heard them mentioned, but I want to do it now because so often it doesn't seem like people really get the credit they deserve. First, President Bush's science advisor was a gentleman named John Marburger. John, who almost always managed to get into the conversation that he was a lifelong Democrat. I don't know how he escaped Karl Rove's vetting system. Was hugely helpful. We had plenty of differences of opinion, particularly on climate, but he was hugely helpful on nanotechnology. Second, the ranking member on our subcommittee was George Allen, Republican of Virginia. We certainly had a host of issues that we had differences of opinion on, but when it came to nanotech, Senator Allen was all in. And finally, someone who doesn't get remembered enough and who I got to be very close with when we were both members of the House of Representatives was Science Chairman Sherwood Sherry Boehlert, who was enormously helpful in terms of getting this off the ground. So my goal as I worked with these three was to funnel money into research as one kind of key factor, but to go further and establish a framework for making sure that the resources were going where they could have the greatest impact. So I said when I introduced the bill in early 2003, there has to be careful planning to make sure that money is used for sound science over the long term. That's the reason for the legislation I'm issuing today. The strategic planning it prescribes will ensure that scientists get the support they need to realize nanotech's greatest potential. So we always know that technology is going to evolve over time, but that principle that we talked about then is just as valid today. Smart policymaking's got to go hand in hand with growing industries that create more high-skill, high-wage jobs and technologies that will maximize their full potential. So in 2003, the bill passed unanimously in both the chambers of Congress, was signed, as you saw on that little video, by President Bush, and we all said, this is a really cool time to be alive. So that's our history, kind of trip down memory lane that hopefully gives you a little bit of background. And I thought I'd use the next couple of minutes to tell you where I think we are now and why the National Nanotechnology Initiative has been so successful. According to an impact study commissioned by the Nanotech Initiative, the nanotechnology sector has provided more than $1 trillion to the US economy over the past 20 years. The Census Bureau estimates in 2017, 171,000 workers were employed by nanotechnology research and development companies. That doesn't even include the workforce or the economic benefits from Fortune 500 companies like Intel, which also is a very important player in my home state. In Oregon now, we've got 60 companies contributing $318 million in annual wages. We boast 2 Nobel laureates. Pretty good for a small state, huh? Linus Pauling and Carl Wieman with 3 prizes between them in the field of nanotech. In short, anybody who thought this field would become a huge force for our economy has been proved right. So if you are one of those people, take a little pat on the back. Now, I want to mention a couple of other things in my home state that we want to brag about. Oregon State is a hub to a massive industry, the Northwest Nanotechnology Infrastructure Site. I could keep you here all day to take you through the projects that we put together. First is promising research into the use of nanoparticles to both detect and treat ectopic pregnancies and lower the risk to moms. The other is the development of a nanoparticle spray that's intended to protect wine grapes from wildfire smoke. I'm telling you, this is a real problem in the West with all these fires. The smoke has taken a huge toll on our agriculture sector, and wildfire smoke has been a particular problem that can ruin world-class wines. Also, the Oregon Nanoscience and Microtechnology Institute is doing important work on commercializing nanotechnology discoveries. They've been crucial to taking promising nanoscience and turning it into nanotech jobs. Gordon Smith and I worked for years to win millions of dollars in funding help to what's called ONAMI and getting it off the ground. We got an $11 million appropriation. There was help from the state of Oregon, and it's helped tremendously in dealing with the commercialization gap funding issue, which many of you know is front and center even today. So I think it's fair to say that the 21st Century Nanotechnology Research and Development Act exceeded everybody's expectations. As the lead author, I thought it'd be useful. I never thought 20 years later I'd be standing up here in a blue suit and talking to you about what it's meant to researchers across the country. And I congratulate you all for making the partnership work. You know, people always say in political campaigns, and I heard already people discussing some of the politics of today. Somebody stands up and says, I created thousands of jobs. And then the next person says, don't vote for that bum. Vote for me because I created 10,000 jobs. The reality is those of us in Congress do not have a machine on our desk where we whirl the thing around a couple of times and outspit the jobs. The jobs come from the private sector and they come from initiative. And what our job is in the Congress is to get the climate right, you know, set the dials right. So people like you, scientists and innovators and private sector entrepreneurs can go do their thing. And I think that the nanotechnology law that we wrote is a perfect example of the role that makes sense for government, a role that makes sense for scientists, and a role that makes sense for entrepreneurs. Let me close with just a couple of points about the future. And that is, we're going on to obviously AI, and there are a couple of lessons I think to be learned. One is our first steps really need to frame our direction. And what I've introduced with Senator Booker and Congresswoman Yvette Clarke, I think does that. It's much like our 21st century nano law. The bill is called the Algorithm Accountability Act. And it basically starts to unpack for the country what in the world these algorithm things are. You know, a lot of people think, well, this is kind of neutral and just kind of use one of these things and everything turns out fine. We all know that we bring our biases to this whole issue of an algorithm. And so what we are doing with the Algorithm Accountability Act is taking a soft touch in terms of the development, but making sure that there's a strong hand for consumer protection in terms of the guardrails. So people aren't going to lose their job. They aren't going to lose an opportunity for an education. That's what we sought to do with the 21st century nanotech law. And I think not only did the law make sense for the times, but it gives us a good direction for the future. Finally, I want to just mention one other person. Dr. Harper, is Dr. Harper in the house? Dr. Harper is the LeBron James of nanotechnology. Been at the forefront of shedding light on man-made microplastics and the like. A reminder that technology innovation doesn't only mean cooler and newer gadgets. We're very proud of this, this individual. And look, I think that these are exciting kinds of times for science. Obviously, people are looking at AI as kind of almost, you know, Internet 3.0. I was around for Internet 2.0, not because I was particularly savvy about it, but because I wanted to ask the right questions. And I got to talk to people like yourselves. And I just want you to know that as long as I have the honor to represent Oregon in the United States Senate, I'm going to keep asking people like you, and for everybody who's been working and toiling and all the sweat equity that went into nanotechnology, you did it right. Keep on keeping on. Thanks, everybody.